Welcome to Youth Ministry Unscripted, the Rooted Youth Ministry podcast, where we talk real, honest, and raw about gospel-centered youth ministry. I'm one of your co-hosts, Danny Kwan, and I want to welcome Becca, Isaiah, and Josh. Say hello, everyone.
Hello.
Praise the Lord.
So the four of us, we all come with a lot of real-world youth ministry experience, and I know Josh, out of the four of us, is still in the local church, but we all have been long-time youth pastors. So we wanted to talk about a topic that is very close to my heart. I always say I was really good connecting with the kids, but I wasn't good with my volunteers, but somehow they stayed with me a long time. But I did have good volunteers, and so today we're going to be talking about honest, real, and raw about youth ministry volunteers. And the first question I had for us all is, what's your definition of a good youth ministry volunteer? And I could probably define what a definition of a bad youth ministry volunteer is pretty easily, but from my experience. But
Yeah.
anybody just jump in. What's your definition of a good youth ministry volunteer?
Yeah, I think I'm sitting in an interesting place because now I am a volunteer. So I'm like, yeah, I think a great youth ministry volunteer is someone who deeply loves Jesus and deeply loves teenagers. And so if you've got those two things, there's a good chance that we're going to be able to find a great way to use you within the ministry, right? And that doesn't always mean, I remember having a lot of conversations with volunteers who felt like they didn't know how to have conversations or didn't know where to start conversations and relationships. And some of them were really natural at it, and some of them didn't have that necessarily ability to sit with students one-on-one, but they were phenomenal at helping to plan retreats. They were great at handling games, which I am terrible at because I will forget all the rules and just make it up as I go. And instead I had a volunteer who was just phenomenal. He was just a coach always. And so he just could make up the craziest, most fun games to bring our group together. And so but it was able to say, like, whatever your gifts are, we can use you as long as you're loving Jesus and you really want to love teenagers so that they can see Jesus. I think was always my kind of two requirements.
Yeah.
About the rest of y'all.
I think when we're doing, any kind of volunteer stuff at our church, these I'm sure got borrowed from like the secular hiring world, but we have like 4 C's. And so it's character, competency, chemistry, and then we add calling to it. Character, you can't add, you can't give that to someone that doesn't have it. So they need, that's definitely like first criteria. Chemistry is like, are they going to click with people in the team? I think that can be important. I think you get a sense of people that are going to work well on a team of people, work well with teenagers. Do they have some chemistry with the teenagers? That's important. I think competency, kind of like what you were saying, Becca, you can teach competency, and competency kind of depends on what area, right? Like you might have somebody that's not a good upfront teacher, but they'd be great in a small group of kids. They might not be great in a small group of kids, but they'd be great organizing an event or something or putting together things. And then I think the last one that we add at our church is calling. And that is just kind of like, do they want to do this? Do they have some passion about making disciples with teenagers? I think all of those things are elements to consider. You don't have to be 100% on all of them, other than I think character. But some of them can be taught, and some of them you kind of find the right spot for them. But I think those are good ways to think about, who makes a good volunteer.
Now, Josh, do you like train or teach a new volunteer those 4 C's?
No, we don't really talk about it in that side of it. I mean, we don't use the 4 C's when we're training people. We think about it more like as a grid when we're trying to decide if we're going to recruit somebody.
Okay, good. That's awesome. Yeah.
So what I used to sort of the phrase that I used to use and what I used to look for in volunteers is someone who knows the way, who goes the way, and who shows the way. And so someone who loves young people, being present in the lives of young people, and who loves Jesus, and then someone who is serious about being a faithful disciple of Jesus,
Mhm.
and then the last part is like who feel a calling and a burden to make disciples
Yeah,
of those young people.
that's good.
Mm.
So
That's really, really good.
Yeah.
I
So
love that.
as we talk about good volunteers, I wanted to shift to this idea of what's one of the biggest mistakes you've made with your volunteers. And maybe for an example, I could talk about like volunteers who don't keep clear boundaries with their students, and I didn't make them aware or train them, or there's always this book I use in my youth ministry class called Better Safe Than Sued, and I always wonder
that's a
some of the
class.
volunteers I had, they're gonna cause me to get sued, and
Uh-huh,
I could tell a
uh-huh.
lot of stories, but is there any maybe one mistake you've made with the volunteers, not training them, um, not giving them clear expectations or boundaries, or they got burned out too easily? I'm just throwing, that we want to, you know, for our listeners to avoid, or
Yeah.
how they can, move away from making the same mistake or
Mhm.
rectify it, or advice you might want to give them.
Yeah, I think Danny, you kind of mentioned what I was planning on saying, and I'll just give a little more meat to it. But the clarity of expectations for a role, I think, is really key,
Yeah.
because what it does is it tells a person, "Am I doing a good job?" If and so I'll give an example. Like we teach a large group Sunday school class, and so it's really just like a key teacher person is teaching a bunch of high school students. That's one
Mhm.
of our classes. We don't have the space to do small groups on a Sunday morning. And so for a while I thought, oh, it'd be nice to have some other adults in there who just kind of get to know these students a little bit. They're kind of relationally there. So I sort of asked some adults that I thought would just do a good job, can you just be in there?
Mm.
But I never gave them like, here's what time you show up, here's what you're being asked to do. And I think those adults faithfully showed up for a while, but at some point, because I wasn't really checking in with them, I wasn't really
Yeah.
just affirming what they were doing or anything like that, or giving them
Mhm.
real success, like what do I do? Eventually they just kind of stopped showing up
Mm.
because they just didn't think there was any reason for them to be there. So I definitely regret that. I
Yeah.
think that if I had just, even if I didn't expect much more than just you're going to chat with the students, kind of thing, if they
Yeah.
had just known, oh, I'm just here to chat with the students, it might have made their experience a little bit more fulfilling. They would have known there was a reason for them to be there, and they might have stuck around
Yeah.
Hmm.
longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that kind of advice to really do that with our volunteers is kind of also what you're saying, Josh, too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I had some I had some great volunteers over the years,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there was a lot of mistakes I made
Mm.
personally. And I think early on, that lack of like reaching out, communicating, in a lot of ways, setting those clear expectations, and then learning from that over time. But I would say, in addition to some of those things, I think who you bring on matters as well. And it can enhance or it can take away from the culture
Mm.
of the group.
Mhm.
Morale, do kids feel comfortable, trust? Do they feel like they got to walk on eggshells because of how this person engages, or whatever? And so I
Mm.
would say, when I look back, that would be some of like, I guess, the mistakes in bringing on, maybe an individual who just personality wise
Yeah.
Mhm.
don't fit
Mhm. Yeah.
well.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
SOS Memphis exists to glorify God by proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ in underserved neighborhoods through home repair and leadership development. Join us for gospel proclaiming, life changing high school summer camps in the heart of Memphis, Tennessee. During your time at SOS, we facilitate meaningful and needed service opportunities by partnering with homeowners to re-roof their homes. Let us handle all the planning, meals, and programming so you can show up and serve alongside your students. Registration for 2026 summer camps will open in October. Reach out to Kelly at sosmemphis.org for more information.
Yeah, I think I have two really big mistakes are popping in my head. And so one of them is I didn't keep good boundaries, right? Especially I think for a lot of us, we started out in youth ministry when we were in our early 20s. Often the volunteers we get are also in their early 20s. So I didn't keep good boundaries as far as being able to say, hey, when I'm in this role, I've got to be your leader versus your friend.
Yeah.
And leaders hold volunteers accountable differently than friends hold friends accountable, right? And you want those to always be the same if they can be, but there are definitely times that it wasn't, and it made it harder for me to be able to say to a volunteer who is also a friend, you're making some life choices that are not aligning with what I need you as a leader. And so hindsight is everything. And I wish I could go back and say, oh man, this would have been the gracious, truthful way to say these things. And instead it ended up being causing a lot of damage and a lot of harm to relationships that even now are not fully reconciled in the way that I would want them to be. Right. So I think for any of our listeners that are considering how do we build those friendships, which is also a whole other podcast episode probably to talk about how leaders also have friends in ministry. But it's, there are some boundaries there of being able to say, to your point, Isaiah, like who we bring on is really important, and being able to say these are people that we can also hold accountable to how they live their life outside of ministry is important.
Yeah.
And then I would say another big thing that I missed was connecting my parents with the volunteers that were going to connect with their students,
Yeah.
especially because in our ministry, small groups was the thing that we said, hey, if your kid comes to anything, they need to come to small groups. Don't worry about the large group gathering, come to small groups. That's where a lot of the life change is going to happen. I wish we had spent more time getting our volunteer leaders to connect with our parents well, and let really that relationship build in such a way that that the parents felt like they were more a part of their kids' lives. The volunteers felt like they were supported by parents, instead of it being not. So don't be like me. Do something.
No, I think, those things, like whether like having your volunteers connect with parents, or Josh, you're talking about volunteers showing up and not showing up. This is so old school because you guys know I'm old, but in the 90s, there was this book by Doug Fields, Purpose Driven Youth Ministry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I always refer to some of the things in the back of the book, like he has like a youth leaders expectation covenant, or and then he has like a student leader's expectation, and again, you don't have to like use it wholesale, but it's kind of like I think it was really, and I used it as a model to set out some clear expectations with my volunteers, like showing up, and like even boundaries, and living a certain lifestyle, and then showing up to certain things, and so there was like tangible, and then there was spiritual boundaries. So it kind of helped set some guidelines to at least if there was mistakes happening on their part, or I didn't guide them, I had something to say, hey, these are the expectations we have, and I'm sure we've all had to have some tough conversations. This is another episode too, Becca, but
Yeah.
like when your volunteers aren't doing like living up to our expectations.
Yep.
That was a struggle for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had those hard conversations.
Having to hard conversations. And like I had one volunteer, like the kids came to me like he's so great, but all he does is talk about sports. And
Mm,
to tell him, hey, you got to teach.
yeah.
But he was such a great guy,
Yeah.
and the kids loved him.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to kick him out, but I was like, hey, you gotta teach in your small group too. You can't just
Yeah.
be talking about Philadelphia sports trivia.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. We had I was maybe 7 months into my role as leader, and was 23, and we had a volunteer who was 10 years older than me, who lost their temper in front of students, and used a lot of choice words on a retreat. And this person had been a volunteer at the church for 15 years probably, and I had to go in my 7th month of being in leadership to sit down and be like, okay, we've got to talk about how we behave around students. And I think for any of us, we've had to also be in those roles too, of how do you put those boundaries and set those things. So it sounds like we do need a whole other episode on that
Yeah.
hard stuff too.
Yeah.
We'll come up with that.
Can we park on that for just a second?
Sure.
I think that it's a common theme. Like, it would not surprise me if a lot of the people listening have only been in their role. They're probably a lot of our listeners are probably like young people.
Mm.
So they're dealing with volunteers who often are old enough to maybe be their parents. These are the people who have invested in this church, and they're
Yep.
working with teenagers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then often you're new to a role if you're young, and that means you've inherited a set of people
Yes.
who may be very committed and even
Yes.
passionate about their youth ministry. But they're the way that they do things, maybe because, if you're seminary trained or something, you might have a theological bent.
Mhm.
You might have an idealistic way that idea of the approach you're going to take to youth ministry that might be very different than what they're doing in the past, because the other person is just volunteer
Yeah.
who loves teenagers, but they don't really have a lot of understanding or knowledge or theological education or anything like that. They've just been investing in teenagers, which is great. The guy, I learned so much from a guy. He probably does not listen to this, but his name is Wayne Webster. And man, I learned so much from that guy. He's an evangelist, loves teenagers. He would get paid by the church, but he would give all the money back. Like, he would donate all the money back to the church that they were paying him to do youth ministry. And he's just a fantastic guy. So when I came in, he had been doing things for years, and he did them in a different way than I would have.
Mhm.
And so I think that and he and I continued to work together, and there was no issue. Okay.
Mm.
But that's not often the case.
Yeah.
You come in and you have people that might not be as well suited. They're not somebody you might have wanted to recruit as a volunteer, but you've kind of
Mhm.
inherited them.
Mm.
And so I think there's some skill to this. And I
Yeah.
think the only thing I would say, you guys throw out what you want, but I would say number one is, I would probably, unless there were like major red flags, I would be hesitant to come in and try to clean house from the moment you walk into a youth
Yep.
ministry. I think
Yep.
it could be a redirection
Yep.
and kind of get everybody on vision. And then I would also want to make sure that I had the full support of my leadership when I
Mhm.
was going to make changes, especially when it has to do with changing the volunteer team
Yep.
in a big way, especially if it means removing someone or
Mhm.
changing someone who's been involved. I'll be slow at the beginning to that. Get to
Yeah.
know people, try to see if you can get on the same page in some way, pray about that, try to build bridges. I feel like that's just a common thing when I talk to new people, is like, I inherited these people that I don't know what to do with.
Yeah.
I'm sure in addition to like inheriting, and this is something that I experience, is that when you first come on, then you lose folks.
Yeah.
You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I just want to encourage those listeners, like, to just, it's easy to take the things like that personal.
Yeah.
It just, we just have to, just do a work in our own hearts to
Mhm.
recognize that it's not about us as we
Mhm.
lose those. Because I know for me, that happened,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
I started to take it personal. But it's just the relationship that they built and
Yeah.
developed with the
Yeah.
previous person,
Yeah.
and now that person is gone, they saw it as a
Yeah.
way for them to take a break from serving in
Yeah.
that way. And
That's
so now is an opportunity for us to build new and develop new relationships with other adults
Mhm.
within
Yeah.
the congregation.
Oh, that's good. That's a good word.
Wading into youth ministry can be overwhelming. It's more overwhelming if you don't have someone to lean on and learn from. The Rooted Youth Ministry Mentorship Program was created for youth pastors in precisely this situation. The program is designed to provide both small group and individual coaching for youth ministers who are in their first 3 years of youth ministry, or youth ministers who are transitioning to a gospel-centered approach. This program is 1 year, wherein small groups of 4 to 6 youth ministers are led by one mentor in both a cohort and an individual setting through a carefully crafted 12-month curriculum designed to help you grow spiritually as an individual and as a youth minister. This comprehensive curriculum, designed by and for youth ministers, cover all facets of youth ministry, from Bible teaching, relational discipleship, equipping and training volunteers, missions, retreats, and crisis management. At the end of the program, we expect you'll be more proficient in teaching the Bible to students. You'll feel more comfortable partnering with parents, and you'll be better equipped to handle crisis situations, among other things. Additionally, when you complete the program, you'll receive a Rooted Youth Ministry certificate to affirm your commitment to join God in the work that He is doing in the lives of the students you serve.
So the next thing we want to talk about with volunteers, and I'm just going to admit this and confess, I was at my church 29 years. I'm proud of that as a youth pastor, but I was really bad at training volunteers. At Rooted, we started these 1-day training for Asian American churches because I was so bad at training volunteers. So I started this for youth workers to bring their youth leaders because I
Right.
was so bad at this. But um, what are some things you do to train your volunteers in different ways? Bible, how to connect with kids, or how to just it can be anything, but um you know um like I had this example of like volunteers who focus too much on entertaining and having fun with kids versus relational discipleship, and how would you train them in that if that's one of your philosophies of ministry? But how in your experience have just so our listeners can hear our different ways we've trained volunteers or in our ministries in the past or present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, it has to start with you having a clear vision of how you would like your ministry to be and to grow. And so, we are out of Rooted, we are very focused on relational discipleship. And so and gospel centrality in all things. And so um even being able to take from that, saying, hey, these are the two things that we focus on the most, and being able to just really say to your volunteers, whether it's, we used to have a training in the fall and a training right in the winter time, right
Okay.
before we'd started back up.
Yeah.
And it would just be a Sunday afternoon. We'd provide lunch after church, and we'd ask everyone to stay back for, for like 90 minutes, maybe have lunch, kind of walk through what we are thinking about teaching and get people's feedback. But also it was really just this time to say, like, hey, this is how we want our small groups to be led. And then for our leaders who felt like they didn't know, how do we engage in that relational discipleship? How do we really do that well? How do we have, if we've got the guys that really love just talking about sports, how do we encourage them to think in maybe a new way?
Yeah.
And part of it was even having to train our leaders to consider how what is their level of discipling themselves? What is their level of teaching the gospel to themselves?
Yeah.
And then sometimes it would be, I'd bring in, if we if I had some of my leaders who were young adults, I'd bring in our young adult pastor and say, hey, would you mind meeting with these people a little bit more? Because I don't have the time to train them a little bit more in what it looks like to be relationally discipled.
Yeah.
If it was someone who was older, I would ask maybe one of our deacons who was friends with them or who understood it or who I knew had been leading a small group for the last 20 years in the church. I'd say, hey, would you meet with this other leader? And really trying to connect them with some more, but it was also just being intentional of saying, like, if those are my two things and I'm clear on them, then I want to make sure that our leaders are clear on them. So it was finding time in the calendar to do that well.
And especially like a biannual, twice a year
right
kind of training, which is great
yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll say this one last thing too. We had a good friend of the church who was really gifted in, his name is John Cox. Absolutely adore him. He is a psychologist by trade, but also has an MDiv. And so we would actually bring him in to do trainings to teach people how to sit with people well. And how do you handle, the one-off weird question from a 13-year-old about aliens and Jesus, connected with how do you sit with a kid whose parents are going through a divorce, and being able to provide that as well. And so, for our listeners who maybe are like, I don't have that kind of budget, that's perfectly fine. You do not need to be spending a lot of money on this, but our time gets to be the thing that we can really give our volunteers. And so finding that time is difficult, but it will end up serving you so much better in the long run.
Yeah, I think as like ministry leaders, we try to multiply ourselves.
Yeah. Yep.
Because we can't, depending on how big our youth ministry is, we can't walk with each individual, meet with each individual. So we try to multiply ourselves, and equip and empower those leaders to do the work of the ministry. And so what I used to do, and I think from a lot of like the mistakes that I made, it probably was some like overcorrection things that I, going overboard with some things that I did. But I used to try to put together like a detailed like package of like, here's what the expectation is. But some people read it, some people don't. And so I tried to model as best as I can what I was inviting those leaders into. So I will reach out to, outside of like the church context. I will reach out, have contact points with those leaders. Maybe it's a text. And I would try to be intentional about meeting with each of those leaders in person, like coffee, lunch, or something like that. And so again, try to model the things. And I think about, Paul and Timothy, where he said, man, what you have heard from me, entrust to others.
Yep.
And so if I'm inviting them to come in, walk with students and make disciples. So I had to, in a lot of ways, I felt like it was my role to model that, like how I showed up in their lives.
That's great.
And, what I was inviting them to do in the lives of young people.
Yep. I love that. That's good.
Josh, how about you? Anything from your ministry?
Yeah, training. We would do we do a big training at the beginning of the year for all of our leaders, and our church kind of approaches the training. Everybody who's a volunteer that is a discipleship kind of capacity does a broad training together. Like our pastor comes in and speaks to them, and then we kind of break out and do smaller, subsets. So we would have a youth meeting after that. And what we do is we try to give a good vision for here's what the youth ministry does as a whole. Here's how your individual role. We have D group leaders, discipleship group leaders. That's our main volunteer-based thing, a small group of students. And so we try to vision cast, clarify expectations. And then that's big on the front end. And then we make ourselves, me and we have another part-time staff who kind of oversees some of the middle school ministry stuff and girls ministry. And the two of us make ourselves available to those small group leaders throughout the year. So we're checking in with them. So instead of it being kind of a continuous training, it's a little more like, how was your group tonight? Let's talk about what's going on. And how can we work with you? So I wouldn't say we don't have a weekly meeting. We don't have a monthly meeting. It's really more just like once in the year, follow-up kind of celebration at the end, but a lot of personal check-in, and that kind of thing throughout the year.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. And for we had a monthly meeting, just 45 minutes. We read an article, but I just want to share one thing I did. I borrowed this from Young Life, Colorado. I heard this from somebody that they had a philosophy that for every 1 hour you spend with teens, you need to spend 1 hour fellowshipping, growing in the Lord in your own community.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I really tried to push that, as quote unquote training for my youth ministry leaders, that every 1 hour you spend with our teenagers, you're 1 hour in like a small group or home group or, worshiping the Lord, you're on your own. And I just felt that that was a good way they could get trained, and grow in the Lord. And so that's just one thing that I I borrowed from Young Life, Colorado. Um, so this is a great episode, and Isaiah, what you talked about, we're going to talk about connecting with teenagers and how much that we need to connect versus our volunteers in our next episode. But just to close our episode, I just want to ask a little fun question. People can get to know us a little bit better. Outside your, maybe you're on your phone, you're using your alarm or your Bible app.
Mm.
What's the first app that you open every day or every morning? And of course, it's probably the alarm or the Bible, but what's the first app that you open every day outside of those two important, the Bible and the alarm? Just you could just name it, and you don't have to, yeah, yeah.
Danny, you think I'm
Email.
holier than you than I am.
Email.
What'd you say,
Email.
Isaiah?
I said
Email?
email.
Yeah, email, yeah.
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 Unfortunate. It's probably a tie. The weather app,
Okay,
Instagram,
okay,
or Slack, which is what I use with my job
yeah,
and get all of the what have I missed since I've been asleep for the last, 9
Yeah.
hours. So unfortunately it's those three. So,
yeah. Josh, how
Josh, what
about
you
you?
got? Are you holier than
you know,
us? You brick it? Do you have a brick?
No.
Okay.
I would say probably, weather would be one. Email. I'm real big on trying to keep my email inbox where I can see all of the emails at once. So like
Okay.
if I have to scroll down through my emails, then I feel like I've got a problem.
Yep.
So I'm constantly kind of swiping out of that. But the other one would be, there's an app I use called Athletic, which is sort of like it analyzes your sleep and your O2 levels and stuff, tells you what kind of workout you can do that day,
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
thing. Which I'm not like a CrossFit guy or anything, but I do run some and that kind of thing, and that's helpful to me to kind of get a feel on where I am
That's good.
recovery wise. Yeah.
I'm an unashamed. I love social media, so but I do try to get on my
Danny's just
Bible app.
scrolling reels until he
Yeah,
falls
yep,
asleep, and then
yep.
he wakes up first thing.
Yeah. I do try to get on my Bible app first, but I've been enjoying Twitter. I just got started using it only a couple of years ago, but but it is kind of toxic too. So
Yeah.
all right. Well,
All things.
appreciated this episode on working with volunteers, and I just want to encourage our listeners to embrace the hope and joy of the gospel, believe that it's true, powerful, and transformative. Thanks for listening to Youth Ministry Unscripted. We'll see you all next time.